ancient idea continues to get a modern-day facelift. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet. This is Breakpoint. Before the Glasgow Climate Summit back in November, British ecologist and futurist James Lovelock wrote an opinion piece in The Guardian. It was entitled, "Beware, Gaia may destroy humans before we destroy the Earth." Now, Gaia is the ancient Greek goddess who personified Earth, and the theory behind it is one that Lovelock has pioneered since the 1970s. The idea is that the Earth is one complex organism with vast amounts of life striving to balance and correct its ecology, sort of like a huge immune system. Well, that worldview foundation leads Lovelock to a pretty extreme conclusion. COVID-19 may well have been one attempt by the Earth to protect itself from humans, of course. If people continue to egg on the planet, Lovelock warns, Gaia will try harder next time with something even nastier. Well, it's not clear to the extent to which Lovelock means for his theory to be taken literally or metaphorically. On one hand, this could be just a materialist talking about the dispassionate way that natural systems, like immune systems, try to fix themselves and protect themselves. But Gaia is also the kind of belief that a generation of spiritually hungry climate activists latch onto. It taps into the emerging spiritual trend among Americans. The number of people claiming to practice witchcraft in the U.S. has increased dramatically, as have the number of young Americans interested in things like astrology. The line between secular materialism and New Age panpsychism is surprisingly thin these days. Just take new atheist Sam Harris, who, despite being an avowed materialist, advocates strongly for things like meditation in order to achieve transcendence and to push past what he calls the illusion of the self. And beliefs like Gaia attempt to explain the improbability, the complexity, and intentionality of our universe, things that old-school Darwinism have always struggled to explain. They provide an avenue for spiritual feelings without demanding any real responsibility or change in return. They can also serve, as Gaia theory clearly has for James Lovelock, as a sort of ideological battering ram to help convince those who would otherwise oppose a certain ecological agenda. But beliefs within the Gaia ecosystem, pun intended, all have something in common. They're user-generated. Unlike organized religion, Gaianism, which is the name for the spiritual version of Gaia theory, can essentially conform to any number of beliefs of the person holding it. It's not subject to any kind of empirical test or source of divine revelation. It doesn't require a lot of specificity as to what exactly believing it entails. And for that reason, it not only buckles under close scrutiny, it evades scrutiny altogether, which is a red flag. First, short of just claiming it, there's no real way to verify whether or not a belief like Gaianism is true or real. No tree or rock or koala bear has ever said a word about Mother Earth's existence. In fact, outside of people attributing this kind of personality to nature, there's no way to prove that COVID-19 was the Earth's angry way of punishing us. But therein lies the huge conundrum for Gaianism. Doesn't know what to do with humanity. Are we a part of nature? Are we a plague of nature? Or are we something else entirely? If people are just another part of the system, then who's to say that constructing massive cities and designing virtual worlds or dumping chemicals in sewage and chopping down trees is anything other than natural selection working towards a logical end? If everything is Gaia, aren't we too? Aren't our decisions? Of course, people shouldn't do things like dump chemicals in rivers, but that's only true if we have some sort of qualitative difference from and a responsibility for the natural world. Otherwise, it's just nature conquering nature, which nature always does. There needs to be a true and distinguishable we in the scenario, and that's something that Gaia theory cannot account for. Christianity, in fact, gives a grounding for every good belief that Gaia theory proposes but doesn't have grounding for. And the Christian story bases its entire existence on a potentially falsifiable event, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. That gives an evidence test that New Age philosophies like Gaia cannot match. If Jesus rose from the dead, the whole thing's true. If he didn't, as the Apostle Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, then the whole thing's nonsense. Secondly, Christianity can also explain the mind that seems to be behind the cosmos, an infinitely wise, infinitely just creator who made the world, and he also cares what happens to it. Not just blind forces of nature telling us to check ourselves or illusions of physicality that are based on some divine spirit. We have a heavenly Father, the divine source of all personhood. And Christianity can tell us who we are, how we fit into the whole picture. We are special stewards of creation, capable of massive amounts of good and evil, made in the image of God, with a divinely ordained job to do, to cultivate the created world. What Christianity doesn't do is subject people to a constant dread of Mother Earth viewing us as parasites. One could easily ask a believer in Gaia theory, well, how many humans are too much? Would Gaia be satisfied with pre-industrial levels or only the eradication of every last person? Is somewhere in the middle okay? And who's to say? Now, of course, we'll never know, but we get the sense that Gaia is a capricious master, at least as brutal as what Tennyson famously labeled nature red in tooth and claw. So my advice for any would-be panpsychist is this: ditch Gaia. Look at Jesus, Earth's creator, gardener, and redeemer. For the Colson Center, I'm John Stonestreet with Breakpoint.